We often imagine robbers as rough, hardened criminals, covered in tattoos with menacing stares and ruthless intentions. In films, they're often portrayed as muscular, mysterious figures who strike fear into the hearts of anyone who crosses their path. They seem to be the very picture of danger, living outside the law with no regard for consequences. But sometimes life doesn't play by the rules we expect. It offers us choices at the most unexpected times, and even the most ordinary good-hearted people can find themselves driven to make decisions they never thought possible. In the face of overwhelming circumstances, the line between right and wrong can blur, and suddenly the path of the criminal becomes the only one they feel they can take. Carlo Virginio had never sought fame or fortune. At 55 years old, his life had been one of quiet dedication, marked by a deep connection to nature and an aversion to chaos. For most of his life, he found contentment in the peaceful rhythm of working with his hands, tending to the garden at the prestigious Museo degli Argenti in Florence. His world was one of leaves, petals, and the quiet hum of nature, not of grand ambitions or world-changing events. Born in a small village outside Schio, a quiet town nestled in the foothills of the Italian Alps, Carlo grew up on a modest farm. His parents were hard-working farmers who eked out a living from the rocky soil, cultivating vineyards and small vegetable plots while raising a few goats and chickens. From an early age, Carlo learned the value of persistence and the profound satisfaction of nurturing life. He spent countless childhood days helping his parents in the fields, marveling at the way a single seed could transform into a vibrant plant under the right care. Though his parents hoped he would one day take over the family farm, Carlo's fascination with plants extended beyond the practicalities of farming. He was drawn to the artistry of gardens, the interplay of colors, shapes, and scents. After finishing his basic education, Carlo enrolled in a horticultural program at a local technical institute, where he refined his natural talent and developed a deeper understanding of plant science and landscape design. We often picture robbers as tough, hardened criminals, men covered in tattoos, their faces set with menacing expressions and eyes that reveal ruthless intentions. In movies and television, they are frequently depicted as muscular, shadowy figures who instill fear into the hearts of anyone unfortunate enough to encounter them. These characters embody danger itself, living on the fringes of society without any concern for laws or consequences. Yet reality does not always conform to these expectations. Life can surprise us, presenting choices in moments we least anticipate, and even the most average, kind-hearted individuals might be pushed to make decisions they never imagined. When circumstances become overwhelmingly difficult, the clear distinctions between right and wrong can become muddled, and suddenly, the route of the criminal feels like the only path available to them. Carlo Virginio was never one to crave fame or wealth. At 55 years old, his existence had been defined by quiet devotion, a strong bond with the natural world, and a dislike for disorder. For the majority of his years, he found peace and fulfillment in the steady, calming routine of working with his hands, caring for the gardens at the esteemed Museo degli Argenti in Florence. His life revolved around leaves, flowers, and the gentle sounds of nature, far removed from any grandiose dreams or ambitions to change the world. Raised in a small village near Schio, a tranquil town tucked away in the foothills of the Italian Alps, Carlo's childhood unfolded on a humble farm. His parents were diligent farmers, making their livelihood from the challenging, rocky land by growing vineyards and small vegetable patches, while tending to a handful of goats and chickens. From a very young age, Carlo absorbed the importance of perseverance and experienced the deep fulfillment that comes from nurturing living things. Many childhood days were spent assisting his parents outdoors, fascinated by how a tiny seed could grow into a thriving plant when given the right care and attention. While his parents dreamed that he would eventually inherit and manage the family farm, Carlo's interest in plants went far beyond simple farming tasks. He was captivated by the artistic side of gardening, the blend of colors, the shapes, and the fragrances that combined to create a living masterpiece. Upon completing his basic schooling, Carlo pursued a horticulture course at a local technical institute. There, he honed his innate abilities and gained a more profound knowledge of plant biology and landscape architecture. In his early 20s, seeking a broader canvas for his skills, Carlo moved to Florence, where he secured work as a gardener. His meticulous attention to detail and passion for his craft soon caught the eye of his employers, leading to his appointment as head gardener at the Museo degli Argenti, housed within the Palazzo Pitti. The museum's collection was as dazzling as the city itself, featuring centuries-old jewelry, silverware, and precious artifacts. Outside, the expansive Giardino di Boboli stretched behind the palace, a green oasis where Carlo spent countless hours planting, pruning, and tending to the delicate flowers that lined the garden's tranquil paths. It was a place where the world seemed to slow down, a far cry from the hustle and bustle of Florence's busy streets. Yet within the walls of the museum, behind locked glass cases, glittering treasures of unimaginable value lay in wait. Carlo had two greatest passions in his life: the quiet beauty of nature and the love of his wife, Roberta. Born in a small village near Schio, Carlo's connection to the earth had always been deep, but it was Roberta who had opened his heart to a love just as enduring. She, too, hailed from a quiet northern town, one not far from his own, but their paths first crossed in the city of Verona during a springtime festival celebrating the blooming of the tulips in the famous Giardino Giusti. It was there, amidst the vibrant flowers and the sweet scent of nature, that Carlo and Roberta first locked eyes. Their connection was instant, as if the garden itself had conspired to bring them together. Though they shared a life filled with love, they never had children of their own. Roberta had struggled with a serious illness in her youth, which left her unable to conceive. Despite this, the couple's bond remained unbroken, and they found fulfillment in each other and in their work for the community. Instead of focusing on expanding their family, they devoted their time and resources to helping others. Over the years, they contributed generously to their community, buying an ambulance for the city of Florence when the local hospital was struggling to provide essential services. Their hearts always seemed to find ways to give back, whether by supporting local charities or offering their time to care for the elderly in their neighborhood. They were the kind of couple who seemed straight out of a romantic film. Whenever anyone saw them walking hand in hand, they couldn't help but wonder, what was the secret to their enduring love? Roberta worked as a museum guide at the Museo degli Argenti, where she passionately shared the stories of the museum's treasures with visitors. Every day she led tours, explaining the history behind the dazzling collection of Renaissance jewelry and the artworks that adorn the museum's walls. The Museo degli Argenti, also known as the Museum of Silver in Florence, housed within the Grand Palazzo Pitti, is one of the city's hidden treasures. This museum is renowned for its stunning collection of Renaissance jewelry and precious artifacts, which provide a window into the opulent lifestyle of the period. The collection includes exquisitely crafted silverwork, gold jewelry, and intricate pieces that reflect the era's unparalleled attention to detail and luxury. Among the highlights are ornate rings, necklaces, and brooches, many of which were designed for the aristocracy. These treasures showcase the masterful craftsmanship of Renaissance jewelers who blended artistry with functionality, creating pieces that were both beautiful and symbolic of the wealth and status of their owners. In addition to the jewelry, the museum also contains a rich assortment of other decorative arts, including finely detailed metals, cameos, and works in enamel and glass, each telling the story of Florence's role as a center of art and culture during the Renaissance. The museum's collection spans various periods, offering a fascinating glimpse into the evolution of decorative arts through the centuries. For Carlo and Roberta, the museum was more than just a place of work, it was a reflection of their lives. Though they never had children, they never truly felt alone. As Roberta guided hundreds of visitors through the museum's galleries each day, explaining the history and significance of the treasures before them, she and Carlo were surrounded by the constant hum of activity. Every day, people from all over the world came to admire the beauty and history housed within the walls of the Museo degli Argenti. For the couple, it was a comforting thought to know that their love for nature, beauty, and art was shared by so many others. The museum, with its bustling visitors and timeless artifacts, filled their lives with a sense of purpose and connection, reminding them that while they might not have children of their own, they were never truly alone in the world. Despite the serene beauty surrounding him, Carlo knew that the museum's jewels were anything but safe. He had never been interested in criminal stories or the darker side of life. In fact, it was often said that people like Carlo, who lived so deeply in the world of nature, tended to be disconnected from such concerns. They existed in their own world, untouched by the intrigues of society. Even when Roberta would share her excitement about the museum's precious jewels or mention the security measures in place, Carlo's attention would wander. To him, the sparkle of a gem was no more captivating than the delicate flutter of a petal in a gentle breeze. But that was before one day, before everything changed. Roberta had always been an energetic and independent woman, driven by her passion for history and her deep connection to the museum where she worked. She had a gift for storytelling, which made her an exceptional museum guide. Visitors often remarked on how she could bring the past to life, weaving vivid narratives about the artifacts on display. Her enthusiasm for her work was contagious, and she loved nothing more than sharing her knowledge with curious minds. She would spend hours preparing her tours, delving into the intricate histories of the Palazzo Pitti and its treasures. She was particularly fascinated by the jewelry housed in the Museo degli Argenti, captivated by the way each piece reflected a moment in history, a token of love, a symbol of power, or a testament to human creativity. It was more than a job to her, it was her calling. In 2003, she began to notice subtle changes in her body that she couldn't explain. At first, it was just a slight weakness in her hands, a difficulty in gripping objects for longer periods, which she chalked up to long days spent guiding visitors. Then she started tripping more often and noticed her muscles felt stiff and tired, even after a good night's rest. Once vibrant and full of life, she was now often confined to bed, her energy drained by treatments and the relentless progression of her condition. The symptoms continued to worsen relentlessly, and despite her repeated attempts to push them aside and ignore the growing signs of illness, Roberta finally reached a breaking point and decided that it was time to seek help from a medical specialist. The diagnosis came suddenly, like a thunderclap crashing through the calm of her everyday life, shattering the sense of normalcy she had once known so well. The doctor solemnly informed her that she had amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, ALS, a rare and devastatingly incurable neurological disease that would gradually and mercilessly steal away her ability to move, speak, and eventually even breathe on her own. The doctor carefully explained that there was no known cure for ALS at present, and while some treatments existed to help manage and ease certain symptoms, the disease was ultimately progressive and fatal. The expected life expectancy following such a diagnosis typically ranged anywhere from 2 to 5 years, depending on the severity and rate of progression of the disease in the individual patient. The treatments and care she required were both highly specialized and incredibly expensive. Physical therapy sessions became a crucial part of her routine, aimed at preserving as much muscle strength and function as possible for as long as she could. However, these therapies came with a steep financial cost, adding strain to the family budget. As the disease advanced, Roberta needed to use a respiratory support machine to assist her breathing, along with a variety of assistive devices, including wheelchairs, adjustable beds, and communication aids, to help her maintain some quality of life once she could no longer speak or move independently. Medication was another significant and ongoing expense. Even though there was no cure, doctors prescribed drugs like riluzole and edaravone, which have been shown to slow the progression of ALS to some degree and help alleviate certain symptoms. Unfortunately, these medications were not fully covered by insurance, and the cost was quite high, especially considering the long-term nature of the treatment required. The devastating news hit Roberta hard, but it was even more crushing for her husband Carlo. The thought of seeing Roberta lose her independence, of watching her gradually lose the ability to walk, move, and eventually breathe without assistance, weighed heavily on his heart and mind. Despite her condition, Roberta continued to work as a museum guide for as long as her body would allow, holding on to a semblance of normal life. But her physical strength slowly began to betray her. The mounting financial burden only compounded the emotional weight of her diagnosis. Carlo had always lived a modest and simple life, finding happiness in the little things and cherishing their quiet moments together. Yet now his world was consumed by the ever-growing medical bills and the haunting realization that Roberta's time with him was slipping rapidly away. He felt utterly powerless, watching her suffer through the ravages of the disease while knowing he could not provide everything she desperately needed. In Carlo's life, there had always been two undeniable pillars: his work and his beloved wife. Now, with Roberta's ALS diagnosis, everything he had once relied on seemed to be unraveling before his very eyes. Desperation gripped him tightly, leaving him with a fierce determination to do whatever it took to save her. But with limited options, a modest salary, and mounting challenges, he felt overwhelmed and helpless in the face of such a cruel reality. Then the news came. One evening, While Carlo was pruning a rose bush near the museum's back entrance, he overheard a conversation between two strangers. They were speaking in hushed tones, unaware that Carlo was nearby, hidden behind the thick hedge of ivy. They were discussing plans for a robbery. The thieves had learned about the valuable artifacts housed within the museum's walls and were plotting a heist. At first, Carlo felt a rush of anger. His beloved museum, his peaceful sanctuary, was about to be violated. Just as Carlo was about to retreat, one of the thieves paused mid-sentence and turned toward the ivy-covered wall. It was a small, subtle movement, but Carlo could feel his heart skip a beat. The strangers went away, but a thought appeared in the gardener's mind, one he couldn't shake: the money he needed. This robbery might offer him the solution he needed. For a brief, horrifying moment, Carlo found himself considering the stranger's words. What if this robbery, this theft, could offer him the solution he so desperately needed? They were talking about something he had only dreamt of: money, a way to solve his problems quickly. But as soon as the thought crossed his mind, he chased it away, horrified by how easily it had come to him. No, this wasn't the man he was. He wasn't a thief. He couldn't do it. Days passed, and the strangers remained an unspoken presence in his life. He saw them a few more times, always lurking around the edges of the museum, watching it from a distance. They knew he had overheard them, and one evening after Carlo had finished his work in the garden, they approached him. They were cautious at first, but when they saw Carlo alone, they made their move. They offered him a deal: help them, and they would give him money. They weren't interested in the logistics of the robbery, they said. That would be Carlo's job. All they needed was the jewelry, and they would take care of the selling. They promised to pay him 500,000 euros in cash once the jewelry was in their hands. Before leaving, one of the strangers slipped a small piece of paper into Carlo's hand, with a phone number written on it. That day, Carlo returned home with a heavy heart, his mind still swirling with thoughts he couldn't quite shake. As soon as he walked through the door, he saw the familiar sight of Roberta resting on the couch. But something was off. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. She looked worse than she had in weeks. Her illness was progressing, and he could see it in the way she struggled for each breath. He didn't hesitate. Grabbing his phone, he called for an ambulance, and within minutes they were on their way to the hospital. As the paramedics took her away, Carlo stood frozen at the door, his mind in turmoil. The sight of his wife being carried out of their home was the last straw, the moment that pushed him to the edge. The crushing weight of their financial strain, the helplessness he felt, and the fear of losing her forever collided in his mind. That was when he made a decision, one that terrified him, but also felt inevitable. The thought he had pushed away for days now seemed the only way out. And to do what he was planning to, he would use the one thing that no one could suspect: his deep knowledge of the museum's grounds. He had no idea where to begin. Carlo was as far from being a robber as one could imagine. But every time he looked at a photo of his wife, his mind grew sharper, more focused. It was as if the weight of her illness was transforming him, twisting his thoughts in ways he couldn't fully comprehend. His mind became more aggressive, more ruthless, as he refused to accept the unfairness of it all. God had already punished them by denying them children, but that wasn't enough. Now, his wife was teetering on the edge, and he couldn't stand to watch it happen. Carlo knew that his success would hinge on one thing: information. He had to learn every intricate detail of the museum's layout and security measures, down to the smallest vulnerability. His position as head gardener, however, gave him unique access to the museum's premises. While others saw only the sprawling gardens and the majestic building, Carlo had spent years becoming familiar with every corner, walking the pathways, tending to the flowers, observing the building from every angle, and noting the hidden spaces that most would overlook. The garden, once his sanctuary, was now a carefully studied terrain, filled with secrets he could use. But that wouldn't be enough. He had to dig deeper, understand not just the visible aspects, but the inner workings of the museum itself. He began visiting the museum at odd hours, sometimes before the sun had even risen, when the air was thick with the quiet hum of early morning. Other times late at night, when the museum's majestic halls stood in complete silence, bathed only in the soft glow of dim lights. These visits were crucial, for during these hours no one was around to see him or question his presence. Armed with nothing but a notebook, Carlo meticulously cataloged every change in the landscape, every shadowy nook and cranny, and every camera or alarm system he could find. He noted the smallest details, the placement of motion detectors, the hidden switches, the blind spots in the security camera's reach. It was an obsessive process as he carefully mapped out the vulnerabilities, spaces where, if the time came, he could move undetected. This was not Carlo as everyone knew him. The calm, nature-loving gardener had faded, replaced by a man driven by a desperation so fierce it cut through every thought and action. What had once been a tranquil life spent cultivating beauty had now become a cold, calculated search for weaknesses. Carlo was changing, and he couldn't stop it. The Boboli Gardens, with their expansive lawns, winding tree-lined avenues, and formal hedgerows, were Carlo's best asset. He knew that the museum's back entrance, which led directly into the gardens, was a critical point of access. While the museum's security cameras were concentrated near the front entrance and inside hallways, the garden offered areas that were less monitored, particularly the secluded paths behind the trees and near the fountains, places where shadows and the dense greenery could provide cover. These overlooked corners could be exploited. He began by drawing a detailed map of the museum grounds. It was a slow, meticulous process that required both patience and precision. Carlo spent hours walking the perimeter of the gardens, carefully sketching every bend in the pathways, every set of stairs that led up to terraced areas, and every entrance or exit hidden among the marble statues and fountains. His map wasn't just of the museum itself, but of the entire surrounding grounds, including the hills that overlooked the gardens and the boundary walls that separated the property from the city. He marked every sculpted tree, every secluded grove, and every ornate garden feature that could be used as cover or a hidden route. No one noticed his sketches. Carlo had long been known as the odd, reserved gardener. No one questioned his quiet nature or his peculiar habits. To the staff, his constant presence in the garden, with his notebook in hand, was simply another of his eccentricities. They didn't see the deeper purpose behind his notes. Carlo's knowledge of the garden proved invaluable. Over the years, he had studied every inch of the property, every stone wall, every hidden nook. He even knew where the garden's irrigation system ran beneath the earth, and he could easily identify areas where the ground had been disturbed or where the soil was looser than usual. These subtle details would help him plan his movements with precision, ensuring he wouldn't be detected. Once Carlo had created the map, he began to think about how he could use his gardening tools to bypass the security systems. He knew that he couldn't simply walk in through the front door or the back entrance without alerting the guards. The museum was protected by an advanced alarm system that would trigger at the slightest sign of intrusion. But Carlo also knew that there were ways to avoid detection. His tools, simple as they were, would be his greatest advantage. Carlo's gardening tools, once used to shape the natural beauty of the museum grounds, had taken on a darker purpose. His trusty shovel, rake, and pruning shears were no longer just tools of the trade. They were now instruments of concealment, his silent accomplices in a plan that felt increasingly more like a desperate gamble. The shovel was his first tool of choice. The soil near the back entrance of the museum had been softened by recent rain, which made it easier to dig. But Carlo knew he couldn't afford to be careless. The garden was frequented by other staff, and any sign of disturbance could be noticed. With every dig, he felt the strain in his muscles, his back aching from the constant bending. It wasn't a quick process. He had to work slowly and steadily, digging just enough to form a small, inconspicuous tunnel. The earth he removed had to be hidden carefully, smoothed over to look undisturbed. The shovel cut through the soil with a satisfying scrape, but Carlo's mind was racing, constantly alert to the possibility of someone walking by. Each day, Carlo would come to the garden before dawn, when the museum was still closed and the air was cool and quiet. He would work for hours, breaking only for brief moments to rest his aching hands. He learned to judge the timing of his sessions, working in the early mornings or late evenings when the garden was least likely to be visited. But even then, there was always the risk of someone hearing him or seeing something unusual. The burden of secrecy pressed heavily on him. The rake and pruning shears, too, became essential in his operation. As he continued to dig, Carlo would rake the ground to clear away any fallen leaves or branches that might give away his movements. His trained eye was sharp, and he could move the debris around without disturbing the surroundings. But even as he did this, his mind was not at ease. Every rake through the leaves felt like an added risk. The overgrown shrubs near the back entrance would need to be trimmed back regularly, making it look as though nothing had changed in the garden, as though the plants were simply being maintained. But trimming these bushes also gave him the chance to cover his tracks. The shears were light in his hands, and Carlo used them to shape the plants around the tunnel's opening, disguising the soft, freshly dug earth beneath. Every cut had to be precise, every branch trimmed to perfection, so no one would notice the changes. Yet with every movement, Carlo felt a creeping anxiety, the weight of the secret he was keeping growing heavier. What was once a routine, peaceful task was now fraught with danger. The hardest part was not the digging, nor the careful concealment. It was the constant awareness of time running out. He had no illusions about the risks involved. What he was doing was dangerous, illegal. But every time he thought about his wife, her worsening condition, and the medical bills that seemed to pile higher by the day, the logic of his plan started to make more sense. It was not just about getting the money, it was about saving her. But even in these darkest moments, doubt began to seep in more and more deeply. Some nights, as he sat exhausted and alone in the quiet garden, looking at his worn map of the sprawling museum grounds, he would begin to question whether he was truly doing the right thing or going too far. His hands were dirty from the relentless digging, his body was tired and aching, and his mind was becoming increasingly unsettled and restless. Carlo had never imagined that he would become the kind of man willing to take such extreme and desperate measures. He had always been content with his peaceful, quiet life, working calmly in the garden, enjoying the simple beauty and gentle rhythm of nature around him. But now everything had changed, and he was risking everything he held dear. The tunnel grew longer and more defined with each passing day, carved carefully and patiently through the earth. Yet even as Carlo worked with focused purpose and determination, he couldn't shake the growing feeling that the closer he came to the museum's back door, the farther he was drifting away from the man he once was. Each day he added a few more feet to the narrow path beneath the soil, and each night, without fail, he would fill the small hole back in, covering the fresh earth with fallen leaves and branches until the garden looked untouched and peaceful once more. It was a slow, exhausting, and grueling process. But over the years of working in the garden, Carlo had learned the art of patience. Now it was the only ally he had left in this dangerous game. The toll this secret and dangerous plan took on him was clearly visible in his worn appearance. His hands were raw and blistered from gripping the digging tools too tightly. His face was drawn and pale from lack of sleep, and his eyes were constantly scanning the horizon, always wary and alert for any sudden movements or interruptions that might betray his presence. Yet with each passing day, he moved steadily closer to the museum, to the gate that stood between his wife's survival and the desperate choice he had been forced to make. Carlo knew that if he was to succeed, it would be a race against time, an urgent battle not only against the authorities or the sophisticated security systems, but also against the inevitable decline of Roberta's fragile health. What had begun as a simple attempt to survive now felt like the only way he could see to save her life. His actions were driven by love and desperation, and failure was not an option. Carlo also knew that once inside the museum, his intimate knowledge of the building would be his greatest advantage. He had studied every corner, every shadow, every movement of the security systems, memorizing the layout with painstaking precision. But even so, inside those walls he could feel the crushing weight of his plan pressing down on him. The weight of risk, hope, and the desperate gamble that everything depended on. He had learned that the museum closed every Monday for maintenance and special tours. That was the day he would choose. He could blend in unnoticed, working in the shadows, as if he were just another employee tasked with managing the grounds. But instead of tending to flowers and bushes, he would be plotting a different course altogether. The night before, Carlo checked and double-checked everything. He confirmed that the museum would indeed be closed the following Monday, ensuring the least amount of activity. The guards would be there, yes, but their routines would be predictable. With the staff mostly absent, he would have the time he needed to get in, do what he had to do, and leave without raising suspicion. As Monday approached, Carlo's thoughts turned to Roberta. He couldn't let her down. Not now. This was his chance, and he knew that if he didn't act, he might lose her forever. The day of closure would be his moment of reckoning, and nothing would stop him. This was no longer the quiet gardener who spent his days among the flowers. The night before the heist, Carlo stood at the edge of the garden, looking at the museum through the dense trees. He felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the moment that could save his wife. With his map in hand and his tools at the ready, he was ready to put his plan into action. The stakes were high, and failure was not an option. Carlo Virginio, the humble gardener, became a man on a mission. The night had finally arrived. The museum was closed to the public, the staff reduced to a skeleton crew, and the guards' routine predictable. Monday nights were the quietest, with only a few employees lingering for last-minute tasks. He arrived at the museum under the cover of darkness, his heart pounding in his chest as he stood before the imposing facade of the building. The grand halls he had admired for so long were now the backdrop of his audacious heist. The quiet, familiar garden behind the museum, his refuge, had transformed into the starting point of his escape. He knew every path, every hidden corner, every shadow that could conceal his movements. As he made his way toward the back entrance, he felt the weight of his decision settle over him. This wasn't just about the jewelry, it was about Roberta. Her condition was worsening, and the mounting medical bills threatened to consume their future. This was his only option, no matter how desperate or wrong it seemed. Once inside, the first thing he did was wait, blending into the shadows of the hallway. He had learned the timing of the guards' rounds, when they would pass, when they would linger, when they would be distracted by the routine tasks that kept the museum running. The seconds seemed to stretch on forever, the faint sound of footsteps echoing through the halls before finally fading away. He let out a slow breath, listening intently as the building fell silent once again. The timing was perfect. He moved with purpose, his steps measured, his body tense with anticipation. His years of working in the garden had given him the precision he needed to navigate the dark halls, avoiding the well-lit corridors and staying out of the reach of the cameras. He knew exactly where to go, through the staff offices, past the storage rooms, and into the maze of side passages that few people ever saw. No one would be watching. Not tonight. The museum's security system was his next obstacle. Carlo had studied the central alarm panel and had seen the code stored in the locked drawer during his many visits as a gardener. He knew the layout of the office where the control system was housed, and tonight it was a key to the success of his plan. As he crept into the office, the soft hum of the lights overhead was the only sound to keep him company. He moved quickly but with care, knowing that one wrong move could set off alarms and end his plan in an instant. The drawer creaked open as he retrieved the code, his heart racing as he entered it into the control panel. The system beeped, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then with a soft whir, the lights flickered, and the alarms ceased their relentless buzzing. He was in. With the museum's defenses disabled, Carlo felt a surge of relief, but it was brief. The hardest part was yet to come. He made his way deeper into the museum, toward the wing where the jewelry was kept. He knew these treasures better than anyone. He had seen them countless times while working in the garden, hearing the staff talk about the priceless pieces stored within those glass cases. Now they were his to take. As he entered the jewelry room, his pulse quickened, but his hands remained steady. He had practiced this moment in his mind for weeks, visualizing every movement, every tool he would need. He carefully removed the tools from his bag, a small pick and a set of miniature screwdrivers. Each case was secured with a delicate lock, but Carlo had become an expert at this. He had spent hours at home practicing, mastering the technique of bypassing locks without leaving a trace. The first case clicked open silently, and Carlo's fingers brushed against the cool surface of the precious jewels inside. One by one, he removed the pieces, careful to avoid damaging anything. He selected only a few, nothing too conspicuous, nothing that would attract immediate attention. A diamond necklace, a pair of gold earrings, and a small ring, each with intricate Renaissance craftsmanship, were placed in the small bag he carried with him. His movements were deliberate and controlled, the pressure mounting with each piece he took. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. Minutes felt like hours, but finally the jewelry was secured. Carlo retraced his steps, moving swiftly but carefully through the darkened halls, avoiding cameras and guards. He knew the timing of their rounds, and he couldn't afford to be caught now. He slipped back into the staff hallway and headed toward the back exit, the weight of the jewelry pressing against him, as if reminding him of the life he was leaving behind. As he reached the back of the museum, the quiet garden awaited him. The tunnel he had created earlier that week was still there, hidden beneath the overgrown hedges. Carlo crawled through it, taking one last glance at the museum behind him before sealing the hole back up. The garden was still. the calm, tranquil place it had always been. But for Carlo, everything had changed. He stood up, brushing the dirt off his clothes, and for the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe. He had done it. The jewelry was secure, his escape route was clear, and Roberta's treatment was one step closer to being paid for. He couldn't undo what had happened, but he had made his choice. The night of the robbery played out exactly as Carlo had planned. The jewelry was taken, carefully placed in the hands of the thieves, and as promised, Carlo received 500,000 euros in cash. He felt a wave of relief wash over him, knowing it was the money that would secure his wife's treatment. But beneath that relief was an undeniable guilt, a reminder of the line he had crossed. The very next day, as expected, the police arrived at the museum. They immediately began reviewing the security footage, and after a few moments, two faces caught their attention, familiar to law enforcement, linked to previous robberies. The thieves were seasoned criminals, known for their violent past. The two men had been linked to a series of sophisticated heists in Italy and neighboring countries, where they had targeted high-end jewelry stores, museums, and wealthy individuals. Their methodical approach to crime, avoiding direct confrontation and relying on expert knowledge of security systems, made them notorious in the criminal underworld. Law enforcement had been hunting them for years, but they had always managed to stay one step ahead. As the police studied the footage, they noted that the two men had entered the museum under the guise of tourists, blending in effortlessly. But the footage also revealed subtle signs of their true intent. Quick glances at the security systems, an air of nervous anticipation as they moved through the museum's halls. It became clear that they were the ones responsible for the heist. With this new evidence, the authorities sprang into action. Within hours, both men were arrested, their histories of violent crime making them easy targets for a swift takedown. The police acted swiftly, arresting them without hesitation. As for Carlo, the gardener, the authorities were none the wiser. The thieves had left no trace linking him to the crime. They were too confident in their actions, so certain of their success, that they had made no effort to cover their tracks. In fact, they had barely had time to sell any of the stolen jewelry before they were caught. The stolen pieces were returned to the museum, safe and intact, their resale plans thwarted by the police's swift investigation. With his alibi intact and the criminals firmly behind bars, Carlo could breathe a sigh of relief. His wife's medical bills were covered, and the stolen jewelry was no longer his concern. What had seemed like a dangerous gamble now appeared to have paid off, as the police investigation focused entirely on the two seasoned criminals who had orchestrated the museum heist, with no link to the gardener who had merely tended to the museum's grounds. The truth of his involvement would never come to light, and in that silence, Carlo found a twisted sense of relief, knowing that his wife's future, though uncertain, was no longer clouded by financial hardship. The heavy burden that had once weighed on their shoulders was finally lifted, allowing them to breathe easier despite the unknowns ahead. Carlo realized that some secrets, though painful, could protect the ones we love from even greater suffering. The couple, relieved and grateful for the chance to secure Roberta's future, decided to donate the leftover money from the treatment fund to a cause close to their hearts. They used it to adopt a child from a distance, giving another child a chance at a better life, while continuing their quiet, peaceful existence. Their decision to help others became a way to heal from the trials they had faced and to build a brighter future for someone else in need. Through this act of kindness, they found new meaning and hope, transforming their pain into a source of compassion and renewal.